Spain, 2018. Part 1. The Sudden Fall. The late afternoon sun bathed the town of Segovia in a warm, golden light, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The day was calm, the kind that made you appreciate the beauty of ordinary life. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air from a nearby bakery. Inside a modest yet cozy home on the outskirts of town, Carlos was in the kitchen, humming an old tune as he prepared a light snack for himself and his wife, Sofia. The home was a reflection of their life together. Simple, yet full of love. Photographs of their travels adorned the walls, each one telling a story of a shared adventure, a moment of joy captured in time. Sofia was in the living room, tending to her favorite plants. She had always had a green thumb, and the room was filled with vibrant greenery that thrived under her care. The sunlight streaming through the windows made the leaves glisten, and Sofia smiled as she gently watered each one, humming to herself as she did. Her presence was the heart of the home, infusing every corner with warmth and life. She moved with a grace that belied her years, her dark hair tied back in a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. As Carlos finished preparing the tray of snacks, he called out to Sofia, his voice filled with affection. "Sofia, I've made your favorite tea. Come and take a break with me." Sofia turned her head, smiling at the sound of his voice. "Just a moment, Corito," she replied, her tone light and playful. She finished with the last plant, placing the watering can on the windowsill before heading towards the kitchen. But as she took a step, a sudden sharp pain shot through her chest. It was so intense, so unexpected, that it stole her breath away. Sofia's hand instinctively clutched at her chest, her vision blurring as the world around her began to spin. She tried to call out for Carlos, but the words caught in her throat. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, the room spinning wildly around her. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the concerned face of Carlos, rushing towards her, his eyes wide with fear. Carlos's heart lurched as he saw Sofia fall. The tray he had been holding crashed to the floor, forgotten as he ran to her side. "Sofia! Sofia!" he shouted, his voice thick with panic. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her. Her skin was cold, her face pale. It was as if all the life had drained out of her in an instant. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Just moments ago, she had been smiling, vibrant, full of life. Now, she lay motionless on the floor, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and labored. A deep sense of dread washed over him, a fear so profound it threatened to paralyze him. But there was no time for fear. Carlos forced himself to focus, to push the panic aside. He had to help her. With shaking hands, he fumbled for his phone, dialing the emergency services. The seconds felt like hours as he waited for the call to connect, each ring echoing in his ears like a countdown. Finally, a voice answered on the other end, but Carlos could barely hear it over the pounding of his heart. "My wife. She's collapsed. I don't know what's wrong. Please send help." His voice cracked with desperation, his words spilling out in a frantic rush. The operator's calm, measured tone was a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind, and it was all he could do to follow the instructions being given to him. "Check her pulse. Is she breathing? Keep talking to her." Carlos followed the instructions as best he could, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He leaned close to Sofia, his ear near her mouth, straining to hear the faintest sound of breath. "Sofia, stay with me. Please stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. He gently took her hand in his, squeezing it as if his touch alone could anchor her to the world of the living. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity as he waited for the ambulance to arrive. The minutes crawled by, each one filled with a growing sense of helplessness. He felt as if he were drowning, caught in a tide of emotions too powerful to withstand. Memories of their life together flashed through his mind. Their wedding day, the vacations they had taken, the quiet evenings spent in each other's company. The thought of losing her was unbearable. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through his haze of fear. Relief flooded through him, but it was tinged with a deep, gnawing anxiety. The paramedics burst into the room, their movements swift and efficient. They quickly assessed Sofia's condition, their faces grim as they worked to stabilize her. Carlos hovered nearby, his heart in his throat, desperate to help but knowing there was nothing he could do. The paramedics loaded Sofia onto a stretcher, their movements practiced and smooth. Carlos followed closely, his eyes never leaving her pale face. As they wheeled her out of the house and into the waiting ambulance, he felt as though he were in a dream, a surreal nightmare from which he couldn't wake. The reality of the situation was too overwhelming to fully comprehend. Inside the ambulance, Carlos clung to Sofia's hand, his grip firm but gentle, as if afraid that letting go would mean losing her forever. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and the constant hum of the siren. The paramedics spoke in low, urgent tones, their words a jumble in Carlos's ears. All he could focus on was Sofia, her shallow breaths, the slight rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelids fluttered ever so slightly. When they arrived at the hospital, Sofia was whisked away, the doors to the emergency room swinging shut behind her, leaving Carlos standing alone in the sterile white hallway. The abrupt separation was like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of him. He was no longer in control. Her fate was in the hands of the doctors now. Carlos sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area, his hands shaking as he buried his face in them. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, leaving him with nothing but a deep, hollow fear. He could still feel the warmth of Sofia's hand in his, but it was a phantom sensation, fading with each passing second. He had always believed that he and Sofia would grow old together, that they would have decades more to share, to love, to live. The thought of losing her, of facing a future without her, was too much to bear. He had no idea how long he sat there, lost in a daze of worry and fear. Time seemed meaningless in the cold, sterile environment of the hospital, where the only thing that mattered was the life of the woman he loved. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor approached him. Carlos stood up, his legs unsteady, his heart racing. The doctor's face was serious, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that gave Carlos a sliver of hope. "Mr. Alvarez," the doctor began, his voice calm and measured, "your wife is in a coma. We've done everything we can for now, but the next 48 hours are critical. We'll monitor her closely, but it's difficult to say what the outcome will be." The words hit Carlos like a punch to the gut. A coma. The word echoed in his mind, filling him with a terror he couldn't even begin to describe. But he forced himself to stay calm, to listen to the doctor, to ask the necessary questions. "Can I see her?" Carlos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded. "Of course. She's stable for now, but we'll need to monitor her condition closely. You can sit with her, talk to her. Sometimes, patients in a coma can hear their loved ones, even if they can't respond." Carlos thanked the doctor and followed a nurse down the long, quiet hallway to the room where Sofia was being kept. The hospital was eerily quiet, the only sounds the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional murmur of voices. When he entered the room, his heart broke at the sight of Sofia lying there, so still, so pale, her body connected to a tangle of wires and tubes. He approached her slowly, as if afraid that his presence might somehow disturb the fragile balance keeping her alive. He took a seat beside her bed, his eyes never leaving her face. She looked so small, so fragile, lying there in the sterile hospital bed. The vibrant, lively woman he knew was hidden beneath a mask of stillness, her breathing shallow and labored. Carlos reached out and took her hand in his, holding it gently, as if afraid that too much pressure might hurt her. Her skin was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the warmth he was used to feeling when they held hands. He squeezed her hand lightly, hoping for some sign that she could feel him, that she knew he was there. "Sofia," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I'm here." "I'm not going anywhere, Querida. I'm right here." But there was no response, no flicker of recognition in her closed eyes. Carlos sat there in silence, holding her hand, praying for a miracle. He had never felt so helpless, so utterly lost. All he could do was wait and hope and pray that somehow, someway, Sofia would come back to him. Part 2. The Silent Vigil. The hospital, a stark expanse of sterile white, became Carlos's new world. He moved through its corridors like a ghost, his days and nights blurring into a seamless tapestry of worry and hope. Each visit to Sofia's room was a pilgrimage, each moment by her side a silent prayer whispered into the stillness. The room where Sofia lay was dimly lit, the only sounds the soft beeps and hums of the medical equipment that monitored her vital signs. It was here that Carlos kept his vigil, a faithful sentinel at the gate between life and death. He sat by her bedside, his chair pulled close, his hand often resting gently on hers, as if his touch could bridge the gap between them. Every day, Carlos spoke to her. His words were soft murmurs, a litany of memories, hopes, and whispered endearments. He spoke of their first meeting, of the sunny afternoon when her laughter had caught his heart. He recounted their trips to the seaside, where they had watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky ablaze with colors they'd later struggle to name. He talked about the small, everyday moments, the way she'd dance in the kitchen on a lazy Sunday morning, the gentle teasing over who would make coffee, the quiet nights when they simply sat together, each content in the other's company. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock of Sofia's condition gave way to a deep, persistent ache, a longing for her to return, to open her eyes and see him once more. Carlos filled the room with sounds from their life. He brought a small speaker and played her favorite music, soft classical melodies that had always soothed her, hoping the familiar tunes would reach her wherever she was. Visitors came and went, friends and family who brought with them a flurry of concern and condolences. They spoke in hushed tones, their words meant to comfort, but often they just echoed the fears that haunted Carlos's thoughts. They left flowers, cards, photographs, small anchors to a life outside the hospital that seemed increasingly distant. Javier, his old friend, was a frequent visitor. His presence was a comfort, a reminder of a faith Carlos had long neglected. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet, Javier spoke of hope, of the power of prayer and the strength found in surrendering to a higher power. "Carlos," Javier said, his voice firm yet gentle, "you must hold on to faith. Sometimes it's all we have. Sometimes it's enough." Encouraged by Javier's words, Carlos began to pray. At first, his prayers were clumsy, uncertain, broken phrases born of a heart unaccustomed to speaking with God. But as the days passed, his words became more fluid, a steady stream of heartfelt pleas for Sofia's recovery, for a sign, for any indication that his prayers were being heard. Each night, after the nurses had done their rounds and the hospital had settled into the quiet hum of the dark hours, Carlos stayed by Sofia's side. He read aloud from books they had enjoyed together, his voice a steady, soothing presence in the quiet room. Sometimes he would simply sit, watching her breathe, each rise and fall of her chest a tether to the hope that she might one day wake. He decorated the room with pictures of their life together, snapshots of holidays, of lazy afternoons, of moments both monumental and mundane. He wanted her surrounded by the life they had shared, a life he prayed they would return to. As the silent vigil stretched on, Carlos felt the weight of his solitude, but he also felt a growing sense of connection to something greater than himself. Each prayer, each story shared, each memory recounted became a step on a path he walked not just for Sofia, but for himself, a path toward healing, toward understanding, toward a faith rekindled in the dim light of a hospital room. In those long hours, with the night deep around him and Sofia's quiet breathing the only sound, Carlos found a peace he hadn't known he was seeking. It was a peace that came not from knowing what the future held, but from understanding that he was not alone in his vigil, that each moment by Sofia's side was a testament to a love profound enough to touch the divine. With each passing day, Carlos's prayers became less about bargaining and more about gratitude, for the years they had shared, for the moments of joy and pain, for the love that had enriched his life beyond measure. He realized that this, too, was prayer, a recognition of life's gifts, a communion with the sacred that required no words, only presence. And so he waited, his heart open, his spirit hopeful, ready for whatever might come, anchored by a newfound faith that whatever the outcome, he and Sofia were held in hands greater than their own. Part 3. The Weight of Doubt. As the weeks turned into months, the hospital's stark white walls seemed to close in around Carlos, each day blending into the next with a monotonous rhythm that tested his resolve. Despite his newfound faith and the solace it brought him, doubt crept in during the quieter moments, the shadows of the night when he was alone with his thoughts and the steady beep of the machines. Carlos continued his daily routine, arriving early, staying late, speaking softly to Sofia, recounting stories from their life, playing her favorite music, and reading to her from books that had once made them laugh together. But beneath the surface of his steadfast presence, uncertainty gnawed at him. "Why isn't she waking up?" he would murmur to himself as he sat by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, each breath a silent tease of what could be a waking moment but never was. The doctors were kind, their words careful and measured, but they offered no promises, only the same guarded optimism that wore thin with repetition. One particularly difficult day, after a meeting with the doctors who gently suggested preparing for all possibilities, Carlos felt the full weight of his situation. He left the hospital that evening feeling defeated, the weight of each step heavy with a sense of impending loss. The crisp night air did little to clear his head as doubts whispered cruel truths. "Is this what faith looks like?" he questioned, his voice a broken whisper lost to the wind. "Believing, even when all signs say to let go?" At the local church, he sought refuge, the familiar pews offering a semblance of comfort. The stained glass cast colorful shadows on the floor, and he found himself staring at them, looking for answers in the hues and patterns. The church was quiet, save for the soft creaks of old wood and the distant sound of cars outside. Kneeling at the altar, he poured out his heart. "God, I've been faithful. I've prayed, I've hoped, and I've waited. Why is this happening? What more do you want from me?" His voice echoed slightly in the vast space, a stark reminder of his solitude. It was then, in the echoing quiet of the church, that an elderly woman approached him. She was a stranger to him, her face etched with lines of kindness and suffering alike. She sat beside him, her presence unexpectedly comforting. "I couldn't help but overhear," she began, her voice as soft as a sigh. "Faith isn't always about the outcome. It's about what it teaches us in the waiting." Carlos listened as she shared her own story of loss and faith, of unanswered prayers that somehow still led to peace. Sometimes our prayers are answered in ways we can't understand, in timings we can't predict. Maybe the gift isn't in the healing, but in the growth we experience as we walk through these trials. Her words struck a chord in him, a gentle chime of truth that resonated with his weary heart. As they spoke, the night deepened around them, the church a sanctuary against the turmoil of his emotions. Returning to the hospital with a quieter mind, Carlos felt a subtle shift within him. The doubt remained, a constant companion, but now he recognized it as part of his journey, a challenge to his faith that was not to be feared but understood. Sitting beside Sofia, he held her hand, his thoughts a mix of prayer and reflection. "I'm still here, Sofia. I'm still fighting for us, for all the dreams we have yet to live," he whispered, the beeping machines a steady backdrop to his solemn vow. As he left that night, the stars overhead were bright, their light a silent chorus in the darkness. They reminded him that the night was not an end, but a passage to a new dawn. With each day, he resolved to face whatever came with faith, not as a guarantee of outcomes, but as a testament to his love for Sofia and the strength of his spirit. Part 4. The Turning Point. The relentless ticking of the hospital clock marked the passage of time, its steady beat a reminder of the slow yet inexorable march of days. Carlos found himself counting each tick, matching it to the rhythm of his own heart as he sat by Sofia's bedside, watching for any sign of change. The hospital room, with its soft hums and beeps, had become his world, a world suspended between hope and despair. One late afternoon, as the sun began to cast long shadows across the hospital floor, a new doctor visited Sofia's room. Dr. Ramirez was her name, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately caught Carlos's attention. She reviewed Sofia's charts meticulously, her brow furrowed in concentration, then turned to Carlos with a gentle smile. "Mr. Alvarez, I understand this has been an incredibly tough journey for you," she began, her voice soothing. "I've been reviewing Sofia's case, and while her condition is stable, I want to try a new treatment approach. It's somewhat experimental, but it has shown promising results in similar cases." Carlos listened intently, hope flickering in his weary eyes. Dr. Ramirez explained the treatment in detail, discussing potential risks and benefits. It involved a combination of medication adjustments and a new form of therapy that stimulated brain activity through sound waves. The decision was Carlos's to make, and it weighed heavily on him. He pondered deeply, considering each word Dr. Ramirez had said, each potential outcome. That night, as he sat alone in the quiet of the hospital cafeteria, Carlos thought about all the prayers he had whispered, all the bargains he had tried to make with God. This decision felt like another test of his faith, another step into the unknown. After hours of reflection, he agreed to the treatment, signing the consent forms with a hand steadied by a silent prayer for guidance. The treatment began the following day. Carlos was there, as always, holding Sofia's hand as the gentle hum of the new machine filled the room. The days that followed were filled with anxious anticipation. Carlos watched for any improvement, any sign that the treatment was working. He continued to talk to Sofia, telling her about the new therapy, about the little changes in the world outside, about his hopes and fears. Slowly, very slowly, there were subtle changes. Sofia's face, once so pale and still, began to show small twitches, faint movements that gave Carlos hope. He reported every detail to Dr. Ramirez, who noted everything with cautious optimism. During these long days, Carlos found solace in the hospital chapel. He spent hours there, sitting in the quiet, the soft light filtering through stained glass windows casting patterns on the floor. He wasn't alone in seeking comfort there. Others came and went, each carrying their own burdens of fear and hope. It was in this chapel that Carlos met Ana, a volunteer who often came to pray. She noticed his regular presence and one day sat beside him. "You look like you could use some company," she said with a kind smile. Carlos welcomed her company, and they began talking. Ana listened as he poured out his story, his hopes for Sofia's recovery, his fears of what might come. She shared her own experiences, stories of loss and healing, of faith tested and faith found. Their conversations became a staple of Carlos's days, a comforting ritual that brought him peace. Weeks passed, and the treatment continued. With each passing day, Sofia showed more signs of improvement. Her eyelids fluttered more frequently, and her breathing seemed more robust. Carlos's heart swelled with hope, tempered by the knowledge of the long road ahead. One evening, as he sat by Sofia's bed, the setting sun casting a warm glow through the window, he felt her fingers squeeze his hand. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but to Carlos, it was as loud as thunder. Tears welled up in his eyes as he squeezed back, whispering, "I'm here, Sofia. Keep fighting." That moment marked a turning point, not just in Sofia's recovery, but in Carlos's own journey. He realized that his faith had led him to this point. Not just faith in a higher power, but faith in the love he and Sofia shared, faith in the doctors and their treatments, and faith in the community he had found in the darkest of times. As he left the hospital that night, the stars twinkling brightly above, Carlos felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew that whatever the outcome, he had been changed forever by this ordeal. His faith, once a flickering candle, was now a roaring fire, illuminating his path forward, no matter where it led. Part 5. The Awakening. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of gentle pink and soft gold, Carlos sat by Sofia's bedside, a nervous anticipation bubbling within him. Today, the hospital room, bathed in the morning's soft glow, felt different, as if the very air vibrated with the promise of joy and new beginnings. Carlos held Sofia's hand, his touch gentle yet filled with longing for the connection they had always shared. "Good morning, baby," he whispered, the tenderness in his voice echoing the depth of his emotions. He spoke of the sunrise, describing how it painted the world in colors of hope and warmth. Gradually, as if drawn by his voice, Sofia's eyelids fluttered, a delicate yet profound signal of her returning awareness. Carlos paused, his heart thundering with hope. "Sofia!" he called softly, the room holding its breath with him. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing with effort until they locked onto his. "Carlos!" she whispered, her voice raspy yet unmistakably filled with recognition and love. "It's me, my love. I've been here, waiting for you," Carlos replied, his eyes glistening with tears of joy. He leaned in closer, his hand caressing her face gently. Sofia's gaze drifted around the room, taking in the tokens of love and support that filled the space. "I was dreaming of a beautiful place, a garden filled with the most vibrant flowers and a light so warm, so welcoming," she shared, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I heard God's voice in that garden. He spoke of your faith, your prayers. He told me they were why I would wake up, why we would have this second chance." Carlos, overwhelmed by her words, felt his heart swell with a profound gratitude. "I believed, Sofia. I believed in us, in you, in the miracles we prayed for." The day unfolded with moments of shared stories and laughter, tears of joy and relief mingling as they spoke of the future, now bright with promise. The medical team, moved by the miracle they witnessed, celebrated this testament to faith and love. As evening approached, the golden hues of sunset streaming through the window, Carlos and Sofia prepared to leave the hospital. Their hearts were full, their spirits lifted by the profound journey they had endured together. Hand in hand, they exited the hospital, stepping out into the cool evening air, free at last to return to their home, a place filled with memories and now renewed dreams. Arriving home, Carlos carried Sofia across the threshold, laughter echoing around them, a symbol of their renewed life together. The house was welcoming, with signs of their life and love in every corner. Sofia, supported by Carlos, walked through their home, each step a celebration of her recovery and their future. In the living room, where light danced across the walls, Carlos set up a cozy corner with her favorite chair, soft blankets, and the view of their garden outside. "It's good to be home," Sofia sighed, settling into the chair, her hand in Carlos's. "Yes, it is. Home with you, my love, where we belong," Carlos replied, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt beside her chair, resting his head against her knee, filled with an overwhelming sense of peace and happiness. They spent the evening talking, planning, and simply enjoying the quiet togetherness that had been so sorely missed. As night fell and the stars appeared in the sky, they stepped outside for a moment, Sofia leaning on Carlos as they looked up at the night sky. "Look at those stars, Sofia. They've been watching over us, just like I've been watching over you. And now we can watch them together every night," Carlos said, his voice filled with wonder and love. Sofia squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Every night," she agreed, a smile spreading across her face. In their garden, under the watchful eyes of the stars, Carlos and Sofia embraced, their hearts beating in unison, a perfect harmony of love, faith, and joy. Here, in the sanctity of their love renewed, they whispered dreams of the days to come, each word a promise of a future filled with happiness. Together, they stepped back into the house, their sanctuary, ready to live out those dreams, each day a precious gift. Their love, strengthened by trials and triumphs, promised not just a continuation of their story, but the beginning of a new, even more beautiful chapter. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories, and share this video with your friends. Hit the like button if you were touched by this journey of faith and love. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.